Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Nerdy Affair, where we take our wizard from the coast and pair them up with some saucy media. I'm Cody.
And I am Joe. And how are you doing, bud?
Oh, I'm doing all right, just getting ready for this unusual affair.
Ooh, it's an unusual affair, you say.
Yeah, we're doing something a little different this week, and I figure we'll just kind of dive right in.
Tell me more, Cody.
So, normally on the Nerdy Affair, we usually pick a singular movie or book or, pop culture media thing, some icon, if you will. Um, However, this time we are taking a concept that has become quite popular in some movies and working with that concept this time to try something a little new. Do something nerdy affair related, but um, we just couldn't contain it to one thing,
Yeah,
to one movie, because
I, I
we're dealing with a time loop or
whoa.
Groundhog's Day or
Ooh.
Groundhog's Day or that one movie that just came out and I always forget its name.
Palm Springs.
Palm Springs. That was a great movie,
Um,
but can
you
never
have
remember the name.
you have and so
There was
yeah,
that
if
one with
I
Tom Cruise.
I was gonna say, um so I say this statement with the full knowledge that Edge of Tomorrow, the one with Tom Cruise, does exist. But it's a movie I haven't seen. I don't think you've seen it either.
I have
Is
not.
that correct, Cody?
So we will
Yeah,
we
so
will we will be avoiding that one, but
well, it was something along the lines of like, I really love the concept of the time loop and the time loop movie, but I feel like in so many cases it tends to be like light comedies or like single episodes of TV shows.
yeah,
Like
never
you have
really gets intense.
yeah, you never so it's like, there's I think every Star Trek has like at least one time loop episode because like that's a very sci-fi-y thing
Yeah.
to want to explore. But like there were no movies I could think of that really jumped out at me as being like, I demand to be an RPG. Like I don't necessarily know how Groundhog Day, the role playing game, would work. Right? It's like a
Yeah.
sarcastic, sardonic individual learns to not be such a dick. And it's like to, a certain degree, that's kind of Palm Spring as well, although I think they do some really interesting fun stuff with that movie.
Right.
And like I said, I know that like Edge of Tomorrow has actiony elements and things like that, and those episodes of Star Trek don't necessarily not have actiony elements, but there wasn't anything I could think of that I could point to and be like, that is the one that we should do an entire nerdy affair of. But I think there's something really cool about time loops. I think there's something really that draws you into it, right? I think there's something um, cool and unique and powerful about living through, the same, day, week, hour, month over and over and over again. That there's something really interesting about that because, how you handle it and how your situations deal with it and things like that, that I think make for interesting an interesting role playing game scenario. I think you do too, because we actually had one. We actually had a time loop in a game before.
Yeah,
Um,
I've done this before. It's the very rare moment in Nerdy Affair where I was already like pre-ready when this idea was brought to the table and I was like, "Yes. Yes,
yeah,
I love it."
I think that I think you would agree that there's something about them that's just like very intriguing to be a participant in, because it's like, ooh, like how would I handle being in the same unit of time for an extended period and things like that. So here's some ideas that we're going to bring to you about taking this concept, this time loop, and turning it into a tabletop role playing game that you and all of your friends can enjoy.
Yeah.
So, Cody, do you want to hit us off with a mechanic?
Yeah, so the beauty of a time loop is we don't really have to do a whole lot of mechanical adjusting to any tabletop role playing game, right? This is all just a lot of this is going to be game master tips to handle, organize, and otherwise execute a time loop.
Yeah, we're not making Pokemon this time around.
Yeah, so we're not building Pokemon. We're not creating, new mechanics to fit. We're mostly just kind of thematically making this work so that it's easier for a game master, dungeon master, whatever your game system or game setting tells you are, and really kind of just like ground yourself in a way that like time loops won't be nearly as complicated as you probably imagine they are. And I love doing time loops. If I could do a time loop in every campaign, I will. If I can find a way to fit it in, you better believe I will, because Groundhog Day is a good example of the fun, wacky shenanigans you can get into no matter what, provided the day resets. So, the core mechanic, the time loop cycle, dying, coming back, dying, etc., etc., it boils down to how you handle the interactions of the players. At the end of the day, the only thing you need to keep in mind is that the players are going to be confused to start off. Unless you tell them up front that that is a time loop, they're going to be confused. And basically, you need to come up with your big core concepts of the time loop, right? You need your laws that anchor you as the game master. And the big three are: when you die, you reset the cycle, right? There's no dying. You don't die in a time loop. You come back and you start over. Something the players learn or do will eventually break the cycle. There is an end goal. This isn't, in infinity. We're not doing like the first like narrated part of Palm Springs. And then the last thing, when you hit a certain point, i.e., the end of a big day or some event, the cycle will just naturally reset itself, whether that's falling asleep or the town that you're in blows up. Eventually the cycle will reset and you will continue to do this. While most of these concepts are fairly easy, like, duh, Cody, why are you even telling me this? When you die, you reset the cycle is going to be a big challenge to get into your players' heads organically, because players don't typically make crazy suicidal attempts in games. Well, their characters. If the players are doing that, they need to go like see somebody. But the characters in the game usually aren't suicidal. So your best bet, especially if you want to do it in a very immersive style, is to kill them yourselves, but instead of drawing it out, just kill them and then quickly reset the first scene again. Don't let the death hang for too long, or that initial shock of death might be a lot for the players, especially if you've been doing a long-term game where, like, we've been playing for years and all of a sudden my character dies for some bullshit reason. Like, don't linger on that, just start to reset. That initial shock might be startling, but when they realize that their characters aren't actually dead and there's a puzzle here invested in the time loop, they will be fine, I assure you. And that's really the basic core element of the time loop. They're going to die and you're going to have to be prepared to, move them past that moment so that they can continue to play.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that there's, that initial shock, I think is actually kind of a powerful thing.
Yeah, 100%.
In a big way, because it's like, oh shit, like, I didn't expect that. And then, it's just like, all right, so roll for initiative. How do you wake up? Kind of deal, right? It's like, ooh, what's happening here? So,
yeah, 100%.
So yeah, and so my first GM tip is setting up a timeline. I feel like the big thing about a really quality time loop scenario is putting in a fair bit of planning before you sit down to the table. Now, I'm not saying you have to map out everything meticulously to a T, but at the very least to have kind of a big picture idea of what is going to be going on, um, that your party is going to be dealing with. So, what I would recommend is starting out with a set list of things you know is going to happen on a charted out timetable. So, for simplicity's sake, I am just going to use like a 1 hour time loop. So map that out into 5 minute increments. So, for example, at minute 5, Ted sneezes, followed shortly by Sandra from HR coming in with a cake for Terry's birthday. Um, at 15 minutes, the phone call comes in about the hostages being held on the 13th floor. At 20 minutes, the group moves into the office space. It kind of goes from there. And then, at the hour mark, um, the building collapses and you wake up and you're sitting in your cubicle and then Ted sneezes, right? And so by having this outline of a familiar thing, it allows your characters to kind of get used to the routine of it all, but also builds some chances for you to stay on track. So if you know at what time each particular thing is supposed to happen, that kind of helps you keep yourself on track so that the guys don't show up like a few minutes early this cycle or things like that. They're always going to show up at the 20-minute cycle no matter what happens. So I think the other thing is that it also gives you a chance to be prepared for when your characters are going to start inevitably changing things up. Like, who knows, maybe on cycle 4 or 5, they immediately run to the 13th floor. If you have a strong framework, you are ready to live in that space. So you know that if they run down there immediately, the the group of people won't necessarily be there yet, but it can give you a chance to kind of map out when they're going to arrive. And does taking out the guys on the 13th floor stop the crisis? Perhaps not. It's all part of the situation. Now, the next thing is it's also paramount that you take copious notes during each cycle, because I think players will remember things like how a character reacts, how a success or a failure feels different, and ultimately what makes it fun, or what will make the impact when the cycle is broken. Like, will the characters remember? Will they wake up with a blank space in their memory? Things along those lines. Will they get all up in your grill after you broke Ted's nose because you don't want him to sneeze anymore? Things like that. So having this sort of set of structures, and then this also helps you to remind your players. So it's like, well, if you recall in the last round, you were actually quite curt with Sandra bringing in that cake, and she smashed the cake in your face or whatever. Maybe that's not necessarily the best way to go from here. But in any case, a well planned out time loop is worth your weight in gold. But once again, like anything with Dungeons and Dragons, do be flexible. Don't be so rigid in your plan that you're going to be like, no, you can't actually go to the 13th floor yet. That doesn't happen yet. It's the joy of the time loop is that once your players kind of figure out the rules of it and figure out what's going on, that gives them the opportunity to start playing this game of like, see what happens. And who knows, maybe it reaches a point where they find the thing that blows up the building right away, and there's 4 or 5 less than a minute time loops because they run and they just cut all the wires to see what happens. Basically, just having a master plan helps to keep you on track, helps to show the differences between those time loops, and gives you something of a framework to figure out what happens when your characters start getting creative and go off the rails. So
nice. I like it. That's very well put. I 100% agree with everything you said. Coming from experience, the best thing you can do is create a good structure for yourself, but also be flexible enough that when the players inevitably start changing things, that you're capable of doing that because you have such good notes. But my next tip is building progression when you're stuck in a time loop. And time loops are interesting in movies, right? We spend a lot of perceived time going through the same chunk of time over and over again, but it doesn't usually feel drawn out or boring. And that's because we often skip seeing the same scenes over and over again unless it's important to what's going on. Whether it's storytelling, whether it's, them figuring something out, we don't drag on the same elements over and over and over again. Don't feel like you need to continue to do the same exact scenes over and over again. Building progression is a lot like making sure a movie about a time loop isn't boring. The way I've done this in the past is that once players have unlocked some kind of puzzle, right? Like if you have a very specific way they're supposed to, in the case for your kind of hostage situation, building collapsing thing, once the players have figured out what to do in the office to get to the next perceived part of the progression, don't make the players go through the same puzzle that they figured out again, right?
Mm.
Once you've figured out a puzzle within the time loop, because that's kind of what you're doing. You're creating a series of puzzles with the caveat that like, oh, you can keep resetting the cycle until you figure it out. But once they figure out a puzzle within the time loop, it's done and the player shouldn't need to tell you, oh, well, okay, so this is the next time loop. We know that we have to talk to Margaret, who we didn't meet originally, and ask her for the sinus medicine so that Ted doesn't sneeze again, so that when they come in, when everyone begins to hide, they can't find us. Like, they shouldn't have to they should do that once, and that's exciting and that's cool, but we should never have to revisit it, say the next part, one of the hostage takers kills somebody and they reset the cycle. The only time you should really ever revisit a scene is if something new has occurred or the players miss something in the first count or with their first encounter with it. So
Mm-hmm.
if these rules are established early, they will know when they need to engage with the scene or when they've completed something and they can move on. Because otherwise, you get into these really unfortunate circumstances where players really want to go to a scene. Like they're like, all right, yeah, we'll move on to this scene, but you've given them everything that they've gotten out of that scene, or vice versa. You have scenes where they're skipping over that first initial conversation with Ted after he sneezes because they're not getting that that's important. So you keep doing that scene until they figure it out, and then like the other scenes you skip over, like, oh, you've done just about everything you could to gain as much information as possible within that scene. Building progression like this not only alleviates some of that frustration of having to constantly redo the same scenes over and over again, because we don't do that in the movies, right? Like, unless like something new and exciting happens or we're trying to instill a point, we don't do the same stuff over and over again. Like we know that that's happening and we know that they're going through several different cycles, but unless it's super important, you should try to skip things that don't necessarily need to be there.
Yeah, no, and I think that's another like a thing that kind of makes the genre unique as well is sometimes you meet new characters or new situations or new scenarios, and so sometimes it's fun to see that one, maybe the Ted sneezing thing is just kind of a funny thing that happens every time regardless, and it doesn't necessarily have a big impact, and they figure out to get him the sinus medication, but boy howdy, Ted's just going to keep on sneezing in those first 5 minutes. But as you mentioned, like, after a while, it gets kind of boring to do the same beats over and over. I think that's also kind of where the timeline or the keeping notes comes in too, where like, it gives you as a DM a chance to be like, all right, well, you solved that part of the riddle. Do you want to just like jump to the next potential avenue there? But here's my next GM tip, and maybe the final tip, yes,
Yeah.
is throwing the curveball or taking this bad boy to the next level. Um, So in my first, suggestion, I said to have a strong plan, and I think that this idea kind of takes it to the next level in a big way. So after a few cycles, your characters are probably going to become more comfortable with this whole situation. This is when they're going to start thinking outside of the box, preparing new and interesting ideas. Maybe just kind of having fun with it. I know in one example I've heard of a role playing time loop, a character just started burning spell slots because they were about to die, so it didn't matter. Um, can you see this in your mind? Your players having fun and coming up with interesting scenarios. All right, now you pull the rug out. I think that after a few successful cycles, it would behoove you to start introducing new kind of uh, I don't know, elements to show that perhaps this time loop isn't as cut and dry as your party had initially thought. Perhaps there's an antagonist who is also, it looks like, is also trapped in this loop. They're moving in a way that is counter to the way that they've moved in previous loops. Perhaps there's an agency that is pulling the strings like a puppet master. Or perhaps you start seeing the fabric of time itself slowly beginning to unravel as you're trapped in this endless loop. By adding in curveballs or kind of like changing the rules of the time loop as your party is encountering them, um, that's going to add a level of fun to it as well. So not only are we not having them go through the same 6 or 7 steps every single time, you're adding kind of a bigger level of mystery to it. It's like, well, is there something else going on in this time loop that is outside of our understanding? Are we not necessarily, are we trapped in here? Is this person trapped in here with us, or is this person kind of controlling where we're going? I think the other thing that this does is it takes a time loop situation and could potentially build it out into being longer than a maybe just like a one shot, you know? Um, by adding things like perhaps there is an organization that's pulling the strings, or an antagonist who is kind of following you through this time loop. That's possible that you could be unlocking a whole new world of like a campaign of time shenanigan adventures. So perhaps if your party likes the time loop, you can introduce other time loops. You can introduce time traveling scenarios where they're kind of working like a Doc and Marty type situation, going back in time to fix mistakes of the past, or perhaps that you can have it being a time jumping ship of time bandits or something like that. In any case, by throwing in the curveball into your time loop scenario, it keeps some mystery building. Now, if you just want to do this as a one shot and you just want to throw in an interesting antagonist who introduces themselves in, cycle 4 or 5, that's great. But by building the possibility that you could be in a larger time paradox world, a larger social and crazy time paradox world, you can really take what has the potential of being a fun mini arc in a campaign or a fun one shot around a table and really building into something that can become maybe not necessarily a full multiple year campaign, but certainly something that your players might want to return to in the future if you're spending another, night, trying to get away from your main campaign for a minute or two. So I think that's what the power of a curveball can be in a situation like this. Um, the curveball could also lead to potentially breaking that time cycle. I do think that at some point you need to give them the scenario where they can get out of it. I think that would be depressing to keep them endlessly in one situation for hours.
That would be
But at the end of the
awful.
Yeah, it would be certainly a decision that you made. But in any case, I think that this kind of combines the fun of an escape room with the mechanics of a Dungeons and Dragons role playing game, because it gives you the ability to do things like use skills that you might not necessarily work with all the time, while also giving your characters the chance to kind of solve problems as they come up in real time. So I feel like that's the power of the curveball, taking a sort of fun idea in a fun genre and then kind of pumping it up to the next level to make it a little bit more gamified.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if any of you have seen Palm Springs, which if you haven't, it's a great take on the time loop. They throw a curveball in there that I won't spoil, but it immediately added a new layer to the movie that I wasn't expecting, and that was a very cool moment.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, a thing that kind of inspired me to pitch this to the team, as it were, um, was that I saw Palm Springs and I was like, man, that would make a great nerdy affair if only it, wasn't a delightful, charming rom com and was more of a like and then I was like, well, hey, there's benefits to be had to the genre in general. So I'm glad we did it. I thought this was a fun one to kind of wrap our minds around and think about turning into a a game. So
Yeah, 100%.
hey, do you have any final thoughts on the time loop genre of movies as a role playing game?
Um, they're super fun, and even if it's a small part or a big part of a campaign, like they can be really fun to kind of break the standard tabletop role playing game like sphere of exploring, killing things, and socializing with people. Like it adds a puzzle mystery that doesn't necessarily require you to build a mystery, so to speak. And it can really offset the normal in a very positive way. I if you have a long standing campaign, you should definitely find a way to try to do this because they're really fun. They're really fun to make, run, and then watch as the players begin to explore and unfold the time loop, so to speak.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun playing in the one that you did. And like I said, I think that it's cool in that it creates the ability to think about D&D in a way that I think you don't always think of this game in terms of. And I think at the end of the day, that's really the promise of the nerdy affair, right? It is taking something and kind of giving it that beautiful little touch of Dungeons and Dragons to give you the feel of living in a fun thing like a time loop or something like that. I think that um, much like Cody, I'm gonna back up Cody's opinion here on if you have a chance to throw it into your game, give it a shot. I think your players are gonna have a really fun time with it. Um, and at the end of the day, I think that's what we all want, right?
Yeah.
But yeah. Hey Cody, I have a question for you.
Yeah, hit me.
If people liked this episode and they want to learn more, where's a place that they can learn more?
They can go to our website at www.fandomroulette.com where you can find all of our episodes as they're going live, a bunch of information about us and what other things we're doing. And then, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, just above the social media links, we have a little form that you can fill out. And if you have an idea for the nerdy affair that you'd be like, oh man, I'd love for Joe and Cody to really tackle that, you can do so right there.
And hey Cody, if people want to listen to episodes of this show, but they don't necessarily use the same podcasting app as you do, where are some places that people can tell their friends to find episodes of Phantom Roulette?
Fret not, we are all over the place. YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, you name it. All of your RSS podcasting apps, all you got to do is search Fandom Roulette.
And hey, if someone wants to like send us a funny meme or check in or say hi or find out information about the show and things like that, are there any social media accounts that people can use to get in touch with us?
You bet, quite a few. If you're Twitter savvy, you can find us at fandomr_podcast. That is our Twitter handle. And if you're more of a Facebook and Instagram user, we are also on there.
And hey, we also want to ask that if you're able, please like, rate, review, and subscribe the show. If it's a podcast or if it's an app that has things like a ranking or a star rating, give it a 5 star and leave a fun little review for us. Tell a friend, pass this episode along to others, and if they like the episode, tell them about the other shows that we do here. Um, ring the bell, all of that wonderful stuff. We know that any little thing you can do like that helps us to move up those ranks, and helps us to get into other people's feeds, and helps us to start building stuff like this for others in the future. Because
Yeah.
this is a lot of fun thinking about these things and coming up with mechanics and things like that. And with your help, we can keep doing this for other people to enjoy too. We know that there's a lot of stuff out there for you to spend your time listening to or working with or things like that. We just want to thank you for spending a little bit of time with us here on Fandom Roulette Nerdy Affair. So, um,
Yeah, thank you guys so much for hanging out.
signing off for Fandom Roulette, this is Joe.
And I'm Cody.
And as always, stay nerdy.
Stay super nerdy.